The Commander begins to feel the heat tonight at 9 on UTV. Now though, Tonight with Trevor McDonald.
Tonight, why are we waiting?
It was 10 to 10, it hadn't come, and then at 10 o'clock I was like, where's the bloody ambulance? I was going beside myself.
Emergency crews stand idle while 999 calls go unanswered.
We waited in the queue 2.5 hours to offload our patient on Thursday, and the same thing happened again on Friday. It was a 2.5 hour wait.
Is red tape putting lives at risk?
This is absolutely critical. I've actually been waiting here over an hour now, and this lad is in danger if he doesn't get to ICU very, very quickly.
Good evening. Since New Labour came to power, it's kept its promise to spend more on the NHS. It also claims to have increased hospital efficiency, thanks to the introduction of strict targets on patient waiting times. But do the official statistics reveal the full picture? And do those targets always benefit the patients as they're meant to? For the last 6 weeks, we've been gathering evidence of a mounting crisis involving the ambulance service and some of our biggest accident and emergency units. And as Fiona Foster now reports, that crisis may be endangering lives.
Hello, Major Sister. Hi, love, it's Ali. We've got a patient we'd like you to see. We'd like to have a bed, if you don't mind. He's a gentleman who's got a pacemaker and it looks like he's missing R1T.
It's the week before Christmas, and for one of the country's busiest A&E units, it's one of the busiest days of the year. Staff at Liverpool's Royal University Hospital are used to juggling patients and beds, and today the pace is as frantic as ever.
Right, anything else we need to know for this lady?
No pains at all before you collapsed? Okay. All right, we'll take this lady. Where can she go? Getting a bit full. I hate she can go through to Resus, please. Sorry, we're just getting a bit full in here.
Like other hospitals, this one's under pressure to meet strict government targets. The most challenging target of all, patients arriving at A&E must be seen and treated within 4 hours.
Basically, we work on a 4-hour target of getting the patient in the department, seen, dealt with and dispatched, whether they go off to a ward or whether they're discharged home.
Staff here are succeeding. The moment an ambulance crew brings in a patient, they register the arrival, leaving the paramedics free to attend other emergencies.
So what happens is, as soon as a patient comes in, the nursing staff will take the handover. Obviously, they can only do one handover at a time, but that's one of our priorities, that we actually free those crews up as quickly as we can, because we know exactly how much the need is. I mean, you know, they're absolutely packed to the rafters with calls, and we free them up as soon as we can.
But while the system may be working in Liverpool, we've discovered that it's failing in other parts of the country. This was the scene at East Surrey Hospital 2 weeks ago. A dozen ambulances stacked up outside, all waiting to hand their patients over to the staff in accident and emergency. The hospital serves a population of 450,000. But while the paramedics were stuck in this logjam, some for up to 3 hours, none were able to attend 999 calls.
When they get to the hospital, there's a bottleneck. They queue as if they're in a motorway traffic jam, queuing with patients inside, waiting to go into that A&E unit. And all the time that is happening, those ambulances and those ambulance workers are not available to deal with other emergencies. And that is completely wrong.
How frustrating is it for your members to be stuck with patients outside a hospital in an A&E when they know there are 999 calls being made that they could be answering?
It's absolutely dreadful. For an ambulance worker, it's the worst part of the job. They're there to save lives.
So why is it happening? Well, according to some critics, it's those very government targets, the ones that are supposed to improve patient care, that are causing ambulances to lie idle rather than respond to emergency calls. Imagine I'm a patient who's been brought in with a minor injury. The government target means I should be treated within 4 hours of admission. But here's the catch. Those 4 hours don't officially begin until I'm registered by a member of A&E staff. As long as I stay in this ambulance and I'm not registered, then I'm not officially waiting, which helps if you're a hospital struggling to meet its targets.
The Department of Health says that shouldn't happen. Its rules state that all patients should be registered within 15 minutes of arriving at A&E, even if they're waiting in the back of an ambulance. But are those rules always being adhered to?
A&E departments have got to meet a waiting time target of 4 hours. If they don't meet that target, they're not regarded as a good A&E department. They'll lose points in the star rating system, and it may mean less money for the hospital, less status for the hospital. It may mean that the hospital does not get foundation status. And so the targets have become very, very important. They become the driving force in medical care.
Rosemary Anscombe is a nurse in a private hospital. But when she tripped and fell downstairs, she became an NHS patient. She called an ambulance and was taken to East Surrey Hospital.
The ambulance people couldn't leave me until they handed me over to a nurse or a doctor. And this couldn't happen because there wasn't anybody there for me to be handed over to. There wasn't any spaces there, so we had to wait.
Her arrival was registered, but because the hospital staff were so busy, the ambulance crew had to stay with her. It was another hour and a half before a nurse became available. During that time, there were more crews queuing to hand over patients.
I was disgusted. The ambulance crews were talking and they were saying that it wasn't a one-off. They'd been up to 10 ambulances before waiting. One ambulance driver said he'd brought in somebody and he was there for over 2 hours. I am frightened by it, really. Not for myself. I mean, I live 2 minutes away from a hospital. But all those other people that live out and around, they're not going to get there in time. There's going to be a death soon due to an ambulance not turning up.
Last summer, Luke Gallimore had just finished his GCSE exams and was looking forward to a family holiday in Florida. But a few days before they were due to fly out, he became unwell. His doctor diagnosed leukemia.
And he took it really well. I was dead proud of him. I mean, I was falling apart. He was told he got 80% chance of being cured, and that was it, really, you know.
Luke was admitted to the University Hospital of North Staffordshire, where he was to undergo 6 months of chemotherapy. But soon after the treatment started, he developed pneumonia, and his condition worsened rapidly.
John sat in the room with Luke, and outside I was going, what's going on? Where are you taking him? What's the matter with him? Well, he needs to go to intensive care because we feel that we can't look after him properly here. But there's no beds, and we may have to move into another hospital, and it was awful.
Instead, a decision was made to move Luke to paediatric intensive care. It was only 300 yards away from his ward. But because Luke was struggling to breathe and needed oxygen, an ambulance was essential. The call was made shortly before 9 p.m. An hour later, they were still waiting.
He knew he was in trouble. He knew his breathing was thingy, but he knew he was going to go somewhere else, and hopefully they're going to help him. And he kind of took that on board, you know. And then it was 10 to 10, it hadn't come, and then at 10 o'clock he was like, where's the ambulance? He was getting more and more scared.
So he was completely aware of what was happening?
Oh, totally, yeah, totally aware. He was really anxious, wasn't he, John?
Yeah.
John sat with him, I didn't. So, sorry.
As Luke deteriorated, his doctor and his family became increasingly agitated.
And I was like, where's the bloody ambulance? I was going beside myself, and as I walked onto up to the desk, Dr. Lennon, who was the consultant intensivist, he was there making the phone call to the ambulance controller, and I could hear it. I stood there and I heard everything that Dr. Lennon said.
In fact, the doctor's phone call was recorded. The transcripts of the conversation reveal just how desperate he was to summon help, and how, at the very time Luke was losing consciousness, 3 ambulances were parked just yards away outside A&E.
This is an extremely urgent ambulance. It's a 16-year-old who is critically unwell, who needs to get to the PICU yesterday. I've actually been waiting here over ICU very, very quickly.
Doctor, what the problem has been is A&E is holding the crews. They're not letting them clear, and we've got 3 crews waiting in A&E to offload patients, and they're not letting them clear.
This is absolutely critical. This young lad is 16 years old. He has severe leukemia, phenomenally septic. If he doesn't get over there quickly, he could have a cardiac arrest, and that's being very truthful with you. As far as I'm concerned, he is in danger, more danger than anyone out in the street currently.
The doctor's call was then passed to a senior member of staff. This supervisor appeared to share his frustration.
North staff A&E are basically trying to hold us to ransom and won't release any crews. I'm going to speak to the bed manager again urgently, and then speak to the sister in casualty, and we'll get one of these crews released. So it's hopefully not going to be long. As I say, there's 3 queuing.
I just every time, I find this ludicrous in the situation I'm in.
I know, and I completely agree with you on that. One of them's got an eye injury. Why can't they release that crew? It's politics.
When I read the transcripts, and I read that the ambulance controller said I heard there was 3 ambulances queuing up outside A&E, and we were sitting in the ward with Luke, and he was suffering, waiting to be taken 300 yards to PICU. I was bloody fuming. I was so angry. I can't put it into words how upset and how let down I feel by the NHS.
And when Dr. Lennon came off the phone, what did he say to you?
He actually went into the room to Luke, and I followed him in, and I can remember him sitting right next to Luke. I can remember it, and Luke his eyes were closed, and he held the mask to Luke, and he says, "Keep your eyes open, mate." And he goes, "I can't, I'm too tired." He says, "Keep your eyes open, Luke." And he was forcing him to stay awake because he was exhausted.
It was almost 2 hours before an ambulance finally arrived to take Luke the 300 yards to intensive care. But the teenager went into a coma, and 16 days later, he died.
Do you believe the delay did cause him to die?
To be truthful with you, do you want the truth? Yeah, I do. Yes, I do. I feel that if Luke had got there sooner, he may be alive, yeah. Yeah, I do. He was funny, he was dry, he had a good sense of humour. You don't think you're going to lose your 16-year-old son, do you? He spent the last 2 hours of his life frightened and suffering like that. And that's something that me and John, he's died now, we've got to live without him, but I just won't get over the 2 hours. I'll never get over that. Just seeing him like he was. And he was so brave, and I'm so proud of him the way he was.
We may never know for certain if Luke would have survived had an ambulance arrived earlier. It's not yet been decided whether to hold a formal investigation or inquest into his death, and both the hospital and ambulance trusts have refused to comment. Despite the controversy surrounding Luke's death, ambulance crews up and down the country are continuing to get caught up in logjams outside A&E. When we filmed in Cardiff, all 8 emergency vehicles covering the entire city were waiting to offload their patients. And while they queued, 999 calls went unanswered.
What's happened? Can we just get this young man in and then get yourself in here, mate?
Do you remember actually getting us all to do, yeah?
The system's also been under strain in Coventry and Warwickshire. Here, the ambulance service dealt with a record number of calls over Christmas.
Well, actually, it's not too bad, actually.
This handover of a patient to A&E staff went quickly and smoothly, but other cases caused problems.
Unfortunately, people get stuck in the department. There's no beds for us to release patients onto, and there's nowhere really to put people, so half the time it's down to that. And sometimes staff shortage as well. They run off their feet most of the time. Sometimes you can be hour to hour and a half, and other times quite quick.
And while we were there, we saw evidence of the delays. This crew had just emerged from accident and emergency after waiting almost an hour to hand over a patient.
When we bring a patient in, once we've handed over, providing it's not life-threatening or serious, it's up to the staff to decide where that patient will go, which side of the unit or which doctor or medical team needs to see the patient. Until that doctor or the team is free, until they've got a bed, the patient can't go anywhere. They physically haven't got the beds or the staff, the patient stays on the stretcher until we clear. And that's just the way it has to be. It is frustrating, it does tie crews up.
But the problems seem to be even more serious further south. Scenes like this outside the East Surrey Hospital have become commonplace in recent months. The chairman of one local ambulance trust even warned that the continuing hold-up of vehicles at A&E was clinically unsafe and couldn't be allowed to continue. That was back in September.
You've got to make a decision.
But only last week, paramedics told a public meeting what's happening now.
I actually had a patient who had a seizure on our trolley while my colleague was talking to the nurse, and we rushed that patient through the main department into resus. Fortunately, we managed to get that patient back in resus. But it's wrong that that person is spending so much time on a trolley.
I saw it a couple of days ago where someone was coming in, I believe it was with a cardiac arrest, and the ambulance couldn't get into the ambulance bay because it was full with delayed ambulances. So they had to get the patient off at the end of the ambulance bay and then resuscitate them all the way into...
Well, I was on shift last Thursday, and all I can say from my own experience was that we waited in the queue 2.5 hours to offload our patient on Thursday, and the same thing happened again on Friday. It was a 2.5 hour wait.
In response, the Surrey and Sussex Healthcare Trust apologised for the delays, but said patients with life-threatening conditions are fast-tracked through A&E. It said it's standard practice for patients who arrive at the hospital by ambulance to be brought straight into A&E. And it added that recent delays were due to a winter virus, which had reduced the number of available beds.
Been stuck here all day, hasn't had any breakfast or lunch. I've just had a meal. Are you in pain? No. Just fed up with being stuck here.
The government introduced its accident and emergency waiting time targets in an effort to end scenes like these. 3 years ago, we showed how some A&E units were bursting at the seams, with seriously ill patients being forced to wait on trolleys and in corridors for days on end.
I'm utterly fed up with this situation where we can't do our work properly because of external factors. I'm afraid I find the current situation entirely unacceptable, and I know that most of my colleagues would support that view, that to look after people like this is unacceptable.
How fast was he going is he impacted?
He's going to do that.
Is he comfortable?
According to the government, its targets have transformed the picture in A&E. 3 months ago, it announced that 96% of patients are now seen and treated within 4 hours. But according to the critics, the problem has simply been shifted elsewhere.
To your left, just a little bit.
It's no different whatsoever to the crisis that we had, where we did have people waiting on hospital corridors on temporary beds waiting to go into the wards. Now what is happening is they're being held up in ambulances.
But despite the criticisms, the government remains wedded to ever more challenging targets. This month, it's told hospitals that 98% of patients must be seen and treated within 4 hours.
What you need to do, just let your arm just rest. Let it all go loose. Okay,
for those that fail to reach those goals, there are penalties. For those that succeed, there are rewards. This accident and emergency department in Scarborough has been so successful in meeting government targets and reducing waiting times that last year it was awarded 2 special £100,000 incentive payments. On the face of it, that all sounds like very good news. But if you're a patient, it may not be so positive. A patient like Suzanne Harland, who was admitted to Scarborough Hospital for a routine operation in November. Everything went well, and Suzanne was kept in overnight to recover.
Hello, Suzanne.
It was approximately 3:30 in the morning, and my light went on. And I was a bit shocked and startled, and I just heard a voice saying, "Come on, Suzanne, get up. We're taking you to A&E, we need your bed." I couldn't work out whether she was just panicking or she was cross, but she was in a big hurry. And I was basically told that they needed my bed because they needed to get patients crossed off the A&E ward because they were coming up to the 4 hours and they weren't to go over 4 hours because then the hospital wouldn't meet the targets that had been set by the government. I think the nurses were quite disgusted by it and fed up by the way that they were speaking. You know, it was pretty obvious to me that it wasn't the first time that it had happened.
The hospital's chief executive told me they were short of beds that night, but didn't move anyone in order to meet waiting time targets.
The staff took a clinical decision to move the very poorly people onto a ward area, which was a clinical area where they would be looked after for a length of time, depending upon how poorly they were.
You say the staff took a clinical decision.
Yes.
But according to the nurses who spoke to Mrs. Harland, the nurses who were moving her, they never talked about it being a clinical decision. They were cross, they were apologetic. They said they were moving them simply to meet government targets.
That's certainly not the case. Had those patients been placed in the observation unit on a bed in A&E, they would have met the target. That's not the point. That's not the point here. That's not what the nurses and doctors here do. What they want to do is provide the best clinical care that they can for the patients and their carers and the community.
I've no doubt that's what they want to do, and they say as much, but they believe that they're not being allowed to do it.
Well, certainly, I certainly don't see that. And when I have conversations with the staff here, that's not what they say to me.
I believe the nurses 100%. Why would they say it? You know, they've got nothing to gain by lying, have they? I just wish that they were big enough to hold their hand up and say, we can't cope, we can't meet these targets, they're ridiculous. You know, we're here to look after people, not to watch the clock.
According to ministers, our hospitals are more efficient than ever when it comes to seeing and treating patients. But many who work in the NHS have become increasingly critical of the way they're being asked to work. In being forced to worry about meeting targets, they're in danger of forgetting the well-being of the patients.
I had no qualms about going into hospital. I wasn't nervous about it or anything, no anxiety. But I have now, because, you know, I think to myself, if they're quite willing to wake you up, you know, at 3:30 in the morning just to meet targets, where do the priorities lie?
Well, in response, the Department of Health says 19 out of 20 patients are now dealt with within 4 hours. It says our examples of emergency vehicles waiting outside hospitals are not the norm, and most A&E departments do not experience ambulance queues. It adds that there are clear rules that patients should be registered within 15 minutes of arriving at A&E, even if they're still being cared for in an ambulance outside. And that's nearly all for this evening. On our next program, Look Before You Book, we'll reveal how to slash the cost of your summer holiday. That's on Friday night at 8 o'clock. Until then, from all of us here, goodbye, and thank you for joining us.
Next on UTV, Shelley starts to wonder about Charlie in Coronation Street. Then at 9, Amanda Burton is the commander, and later at 11 after the news, the hunt for a murderer who killed more than a dozen people by fire.